Authorship. What is it? How has it changed throughout history? And how can we use it to explore discussions surrounding modern filmmakers? The idea of the film auteur was first discussed in Cahiers du Cinéma. These discussions attempted to examine film through a lens where the director was considered the sole author of the film. André Bazin took a slightly different approach in his essay La Politique des Auteurs. Barry Keith Grant tells us that, quote, Bazin attempts to rein in the excessive claims of his junior colleagues by pointing out that individuals transcend society, but society is internalized in each of us. This tells us that Bazin believed that when discussing authorship, we cannot discredit the impact of wider society on the filmmaker. Barry KG continues to say that, quote, Bazin cautions against ignoring the context of genre and studio production. This becomes a foundation for the argument of authorship. James Naramore says, quote, motion pictures are often described as collaborative media, but their modes of production are hierarchical. This could mean that while all that work on a film have some level of contribution and input, that the final word comes from whoever is at the top of this hierarchy. However, Naramore also says, quote, given the circumstances under which films are made, it is possible to think of any of the creative individuals who contribute to them as a kind of author, which discredits the idea that the director is the sole author of the film, as everyone working on the film puts their own stamp on it. Corrigan appears to have a different view of how the author has changed. In the United States, for instance, the industrial utility of auteurism from the late 60s to the early 70s had much to do with the waning of the American studio system. This tells us that authorship, when it entered the US film discussion, was less of an analysis of who should be credited with the creation of a film, and more so became a marketing tactic. Corrigan says simply, quote, today, however, American auteurs are often and largely defined by their commercial status and their ability to promote a film. This would mean that the concept of the auteur is no longer one concerned with artistic control, and more a marketing tool used by the studios to make films feel more human in their creative process by putting a charismatic individual at the forefront. Think Tarantino, M. Night Shyamalan, and perhaps even Michael Bay. Camera stilo was a concept developed by Alexandre Astruc. This was the idea that an auteur-director would wield the camera in the same style an author used a pen. This lends itself to the idea that directorial style is a core requirement of authorship. Michael Bay is well known for his visual style, which often involves intense camera movement, lens flare, action involving explosions, and often a hilarious amount of sexualization. As Bennett puts it, the films are characterized by the systematic deployment of cinematic excess to the point where it's become an immediately recognizable authorial signature. However, the qualification of the auteur is not simply a visual one. As King puts it, quote, the mark of the auteur is usually identified at two levels, the pursuit of distinctive themes or issues across a body of work, and the presence of distinctive formal traits that act as what Saris terms the director's signature. So we must also consider the underlying themes of Bay's work. Common criticism of Bay's work is the presence of the American military. Pearl Harbor directly uses an important moment in the history of the American military as the core of the film. Perhaps Bay's intense style lends itself to stories about people fighting big battles, like the military, or even the lower scale yet still horrifically violent events of police detectives in Bad Boys 2. Bay's filmography is full of action films, so one could argue that Bay's style is less an authorial signature, and more a result of the requirements of the genre. The military are a staple of the action genre, so we could argue that Bay isn't a filmmaker who likes to make films involving them, and instead simply recognizes that they're an easy group to make action films involving. This lends itself to the idea that Bay is a marketable filmmaker, as we discussed earlier. In Notes on Auteur Theory, Sarah says, quote, the way a film looks and moves should have some relationship to the way a director views and feels. This is the second premise Sarah sets out when describing auteur theory, and one could argue that the consistency in presentation of Bay's work is his exploration of his feelings. Bay feels that actions can be larger than life and much more dramatic than they would appear on the surface. Sarah's first premise, quote, is the technical competence of a director. Bay has consistently used similar techniques throughout his career to a great success, yet Bay is not one to stick to the safety of established technical approaches to filmmaking. Bay is an innovator of his craft, as displayed using his drone work in Ambulance. It would be hard to say that Michael Bay is not a modern auteur, given how well he matches up to the requirements of the auteur theory established and developed throughout the history of cinema, and to deny him the title of auteur would be a harsh criticism of Bay's career, which, while not to everyone's taste, is a prime example of how a director leaves an authorial signature in his work. The consistent themes of violence, sexiness, and the military are Bay's ways of analysing the world around us, just like any other auteur would do in their own style.